So good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for taking time for joining us for this webinar. It's on the basis of a special survey that the CFO board has done in partnership with KPMG. It's really about the talent needs for CFOs. I'm now going to request Rekha Taluri, member of the CFO board and CFO of Microsoft India, to chair the session, please. Over to you, Rekha.
Thank you so much, Pranjal. Good afternoon, everyone. Trust all of you and your families are staying safe. Today, what we wanted to do is, I believe, a couple of almost a couple of months back, we discussed in terms of, what is the future of finance and what's how the role of CFO has been evolving. And first of all, I do want to thank each one of you for helping us get the survey results out. We had close to 100 plus replies, survey respondents that have given inputs. And as you have seen in the last 15 to 18 months, there are two different aspects that have helped accelerated the journey and the evolution of CFO's role. One, obviously, the pandemic that we are still living in. The second one, and most importantly, is also how the business models are being disrupted because of digitalization. So these two things have put a lot of focus in terms of how the CFO's role has been evolving. And most importantly, as we think about the role of finance 10 years ahead, it's how do we prepare our own internal talent in the organizations. And we have got really good inputs, not only through survey, but also, a lot of the board members have done one-to-one conversations with board of directors and the CEOs to gather their inputs in terms of expectations that they are looking at from finance. With that, what I would love to do is today, in today's conversation, just go through some of the key themes that are coming out of this this survey. And then we'll also have a very engaging conversation with Giri and Sugata. Both of them are really active members, and all of you might know them. So with that, I will do a quick video, and after that I will hand it over to Vaishali from KPMG. Sakshi, are you able to launch the video?
Thank you for that. And Rekha, just to remind everybody, the group that you led, including Giri and Sugata and Ram and Vishali, started work in November 2020. So it's been more than 6 months of effort.
Time just flies, Pranjal. I didn't realize, it's been so long. Okay, with that, Vaishali, over to you to share some of the key themes, and before we go into our conversation.
Hey, hi Rekha. I think Sakshi is sharing the slides. I'll wait for her to share the slides. But let me just give the context and the background. I think thanks Pranjal and Rekha. This is, it's been 6 months. I did not realize. It was a very, very interesting journey. For me being from the CHRO world, working with and interacting with you all was an immense learning experience altogether. So I'm very, very glad today to present some of the findings of our research, post which we would be having the discussion on the three themes. Sakshi, if we can go to straight away to the next few slides, please. So how do we divide the entire presentation is into two buckets. I'll spending around 15 minutes on this. First is a little bit of overview of the survey. I think Rekha, Pranjal both have given a context already, but from a research perspective, I'll do some bit of deep dive on that. Once we do that, we will go into the key highlights and the findings. Now, I have to say that it's a completely 50 pages report. To synthesize in 10 minutes is going to be a difficult task. So, but please pardon me if I do some bit of injustice to it. So, but the report is available and a lot of details are there. We will talk about it as we present those slides. Let's go, Sakshi, very briefly. We'll cover the information about the survey. We can go to the slide number 5 and pause there. Okay, so the journey, as Rekha and Pranjal just mentioned, it is 6 months. Now, what was the intent? Okay, 6 months now of this entire research. Every time a CFO study is done, it is more done from a financial world, financial lens, and the financial construct. We reflect a lot, and the leadership also gave a lot of views on, can there be a lens from a CFO's or a CEO's or a board member's view from the aspiration a CFO has? What are some of the talent related challenges? What are some of the succession planning related talent? And what next for a CFO? Do I aspire to be something which people do not know? Is my aspiration known to everyone? Is the role or the succession planning for a CEO as well as a CFO is being done? So all of this led to 5 major themes. And as I mentioned, these 5 major themes are covered very well in the report. But today we will be introducing you all 3 major themes for our discussion. The first one is around the CFO as the finance as a whole, as a community. So what is the finance or the future of finance? Is the world changing for future of finance? Second is more around the CFO itself. From CFO, now that is finance as a function changing, will the CFO's role be also having a major impact? Third is, what is the aspiration a CFO wants to take? The fourth is around the talent management and the talent pipeline. If there is an aspiration for a CFO to move to some other role, are the talent succession planning or the pipeline for that particular role being taken care by the boards or the CEO or by the organization? So this is the entire research in a nutshell. We'll now move to the next few slides where I'll introduce you all to the research itself. I'm not, if you just notice, I'm not calling it a survey, I'm calling it a research, because when you read the report, you will also realize that it is far more than just a survey which is being conducted. So on the left side, you see what is the approach which we took. First, we did conduct a survey with the CFOs, the CEOs, the finance executive, and the board members. So that is clearly which has been articulated. But we also went to the board members and did one-on-one interaction. Our CFOs met them personally, had discussion on all the 5 themes. What do they think is working well? What are their views on those 5 themes? Apart from the survey, we also captured that. The last part is the secondary research. Now, in the secondary research, it is very interesting. We did not see so much of talent-related, aspiration-related information. The information was more around the role and more around the financial part of it. But that therefore made our task a little more difficult. So what was the outcome? We got almost 107 response from these professionals. 63% were from the CFO and the finance leadership. 31, in fact, are from the CEO and the board members, and 6% is mostly CHRO, but some bit of also CMOs and CSOs. Each of the parameters which have been studied will be not only studied on the theme and the question, but from a lot of demographic cuts. So there are 13 plus industries who have given the response. The demographic cuts are industry wise. Even the research cuts are sales turnover wise, the private versus public as organization, listed, unlisted, and also gender. These are only few of the demographic details. Each of the answers or the questions are being detailed out with these demographic cut. Now, with this, we'll move to the findings. Sakshi, if you can, yeah, just wait for a minute here. Now, as I mentioned, we are not presenting, it's a massive report, and therefore, given the limited time we have, we plan to present these themes in various webinars or discussion. But let me just introduce the overall finding. Now, very interesting to note that almost 47% of organizations perceive that there is a change in the finance role, especially post the COVID scenario. And what are some of the changes, whether the changes are operating model related or enterprise responsibility related, or it is just the skill set related, the report covers that. Now, as the role of finance is changing, and obviously there will be a very strong impact on the CFO's role. I am talking to majorly the CFOs on this webinar, and you can relate to the second pillar more than anyone, is that CFO's role, almost 91% has a significant and moderate change. Now it is far more strategic, more closer to the business than ever before. In fact, the CFO is co-piloting with the CEO in the last 1 or 2 years, especially after the crisis. And that is a massive, massive change also from the expectation of what a CFO of the future will be undergoing. And what are those expectations? We'll talk about it in 2 minutes. The third one is my favorite, and I really like this one, and especially when I've worked with so closely with so many of them during the research. I really believe that it is bound to happen. So what is the aspiration of a CFO? The CFO's aspiration clearly is 72% want to be in the CEO's role. And with the second pillar of 91% shift in the future of CFO, where he or she is co-piloting with the CEO, this is not a very far-fetched aspiration. Right now, it is just started. So therefore, only 3% of the CEO and board member feel they are ready right now. But there is very interesting finding in the next slide, which I will present to you in just a minute. Last but not the least, 75% of the organization still give it medium to low priority. Now, if we have having so many changes, the organization has to make this conscious decision to make the talent shift, make the succession shift, the career shift, and that entire ecosystem needs to be in this journey. Now, I'll move to the next slide, and the last few points which are covered here are also there in the next slide. So Sakshi, I'll cover it there. If you can just move to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. Now, the changing role of CFO and the CFO of tomorrow. Interestingly, few things which needed to be built are not finance related, and you all probably have already felt it, dealing with it, working with it. So first of all, it's the entire expectation of a CFO to be driving the long-term business growth and performing, being the strategic leader with the board and the CEO. That's the second very big shift. Business operational transformation is also not just looking from a financial perspective, but also looking from a very strategic business acumen perspective. And fourth is the technology upgradation and digital and cyber and IT related aspect. And last but not the least, they expect it to be a little more towards the leadership and the talent management space. So the future focus of the CFO is hardly finance. It is very strategic. It is very top driven. And it doesn't mean that the other part is dialing down. It is an added responsibility, which I'm talking about. And what will enable the CFO do this very well? One is the buy-in and the buy-in from the CEO and the board member. The evolution and culture, the ecosystem has to appreciate the work of a CFO, especially in the crisis, and also appreciate the fact that the role has shifted, and that has to be very well respected. The level of digital maturity, this is something which a CFO needs to bring in and build in. Focus on more on the leadership development and sharpen the leadership development, the strategic perspective a little more. That these are few of the enablers of transformation for a CFO of the future. So these are what we are clearly seeing in the report. There are certain more, this is a little more important to some sectors, some public versus private, listed versus unlisted, all of that, those details you'll get in the report. But this is here to stay, and it is a very important shift. Let's move now next to the next one. Respecting the time, I'll just quickly summarize this one. But as I mentioned, this is my real big favorite. So on the first slide, you said, we said that only 3% of the CFOs and CEOs and the board members, the board members and the CEO believe they are ready now to take the CEO's role. 74% believe that they want to be in the CEO's role. CEO and the board member, in our earlier side, we saw 3% are ready now, but 40% of them believe that they are closest to the CEO's role. And with the given changes mentioned in the last slide with the strategic input, the digital part, the leadership part, in the next 3 to 5 years of minimum development, they are ready to be the CEOs. So that's a very, very interesting outcome of this entire one of the important aspect of the research. Factors which enable the transition from a CFO to a CEO, what are those? Strong buy-in from the board members and other C-suite. So apart from the board and the CEO just been supporting this fact, there has to be a stronger buy-in. The ecosystem needs to be aligned to this entire possibility of change. Well-defined succession planning for both CEO and CFO. It is needed if this shift is to be possible. What are behavioral skills for development? Futuristic mindset, leadership skills, stakeholder management, business acumen, digital mindset. We talked about that in the last slide also. Let's now go to the last part of this entire theme, which I need to present, after which our experts will talk and do a deep dive on what I just talked about. I'll highlight two things on the slide. Succession planning, we saw that it is so important. However, only 37% said organization has a robust and strong succession planning. 62 believe there is their organization succession plan for the role of CFO has massive scope for improvement. So that is some takeaway which we need to take beyond the CFO community and communicate that if this has to happen, the succession planning needs to be built in, the development priorities need to be brought in. The skills of the future, there are 6 skills of the future, and I'll cover that in just a little differently. Sorry. Pranjali, you want me to? Okay. So there are 6 skills of the future. Finance value creation, risk response, proactive insight and reporting, strategic management, leadership development, data analytics. These are the 6 themes which are critical for the skills of the future. Out of that, only 3, which are finance value creation, risk response, and proactive insight and reporting, are on the higher side, but are on the higher side and also ready. But the second part, strategic management, leadership development, and data analytics, are also on very high side, but the readiness of these are very low, and organizations need to work on this. So with this, we'll go to the next slide. Sakshi? Yes. As I mentioned, this is a massive research, and everyone, you'll be excited. Now that I've created so much of excitement about this report, you will be very keen to read. And my learning is working with Rekha, Giri, Sugata, Ram, is that y'all are very serious-minded report. You're very serious-minded people. You like to do deep dive, and this is a report which you will really love. If there are any queries, any thing which y'all would want us to address as specifically, we'll be glad to do that. But the report is ready. Pranjal will help us direct to that report when during our closing session. I just want to go to the last slide and pause there for 2 minutes and just mention one thing. While today we are going to discuss on the 3 themes, the research, the study is not over. There is, of course, there are webinars which are going to be, we will having discussions on that, on other themes beyond what we discussed today. But what I want to leave behind is, because it is created so much of momentum, created so much of interest. We also thought of doing this as a longitudinal research every year for us to also see whether there are certain changes, certain aspects are being worked on, and certain changes are being achieved. So I'll pause here, Pranjal and Rekha. Thanks for giving this opportunity. I'm very humbled to have worked with you all. I want to just pause here in case, Rekha, you wanted me to address anything.
No, first of all, thanks a ton, Vaishali and the entire team from KPMG for helping us pull through this research. I will use the term research, Vaishali, because I know it's been a long exercise, and like you said, we will have a lot of things that to do going forward as well. There are a couple of questions that came up in the chat, Vaishali. I'm going to, the first one is, what are some of the behavioral skills that stood out in the report? I understand the report will be available for the audience, but if there are a couple of things that you want to mention around this, Vaishali.
Thanks, Rekha. So if I was to just synthesize few of the behavioral aspects which are clearly emerging, which are different from what we have experienced before. One is driving the entire business growth and performance, not just from a CFO's lens, but from a CEO's lens. So it's like a co-pilot kind of a responsibility. Second is the entire strategic leadership. So looking at the global perspective, having a very outside in view, looking at the entire leadership in a very strategic perspective, which lot of behavioral changes from a leadership point. There's also clearly the digital mindset and digital maturity, which is also emerged. And there is one more thing which is emerging is the overall technology aspect. So while digital mindset is one, and it's not the behavioral aspect, but it is more of a know-how kind of aspect where technology trends and digital cybersecurity, AI is become so critical for most organizations. One of the skills which is clearly expected by the CEOs and the board member is this one. I'll pause here in case I have answered that question or I need to answer this differently.
No, thank you, Vaishali. Giri, maybe if you can add your viewpoints on this, Giri, that'll be super helpful.
Yeah, no problem at all. I think maybe the way I would like to do it is to really talk about the last 18 months that we have been going through, actually, because I do think that what as CFOs we are going through in the last 18 months involves a lot of behavioral outlooks as well, actually. So let me talk about it. Maybe that's a good segue. I think, Indian Hotels is the largest hotel operator in the country, and clearly speaking, that is given. But I don't think any of us had kind of anticipated a position where we will stare at near zero revenues. I think that is probably the biggest mindset shift, actually. The beauty for us was that, or the irony of it was that in March 2020, just before the pandemic, we had posted results which were the best in the last 10 years, actually. Come April, we were having revenue which was near zero. So you can imagine the mindset shift there was just ridiculous, actually. I mean, what we were staring at was just ridiculous. I don't think Black Swan was kind of fully in play. And so I think the question is, from a position where we were kind of thriving, I think we started using the words like surviving, actually. And, that was a very, very big mindset shift, actually. And I think it is not business as usual, actually. And when it is not business as usual, and when the whole industry starts talking about surviving, I think a number of different things come into play, to be honest, actually. First mindset, which became very important, was fundamentally risk management. Very, very important in terms of risk management. And I think what was happening last April was that things were so unclear. I think knowing what to do when you don't know what to do, that's an expression which I've kind of picked up in the last 18 months. Knowing what to do when you don't know what to do is a very, very important thing, because we were really swimming in the dark. And a lot of our efforts in the initial months, at least in the first month, was completely tactical. We knew that revenues were zero. So what did we do? We said, okay, let's cut costs. So therefore, whatever we could do, keep hotels partially open, shut down floats, what do you say? All of those were kind of, we were doing in terms of rapidly reducing the variable cost, to be honest, not fixed cost. And so that was one thing. The second thing was really liquidity. And these are all very tactical stuff. Liquidity is a very important thing for the hotel industry in a pandemic like this. And we kind of made sure that all of this was kind of done. So I think that was the immediate short term action. But the other thing which comes into play in a crisis mindset is the question of empathy. Because I think that's a very big behavioral change, which I think CFOs will need to demonstrate in a moment of crisis, because everybody is kind of working towards the common goal, actually. And things are not necessarily numbers driven, because it is about the customer, it's about employee safety, it is about all those factors which are not necessarily numbers driven, to be honest, actually. And I think empathy becomes a very important thing, to be honest, actually. And also, I think, so that was one thing which I thought was a big shift that, at least speaking for myself and my finance team, we had to demonstrate in terms of dealing with the crisis, actually. The second thing was that in a situation like this, where we knew that things would probably never come back to the COVID days for a reasonable period of time, I think while, of course, we are seeing periods of recovery now, and hopefully the second wave is done, and now we will see with vaccinations, things getting recovered. We know that some patterns of travel and stays will never come back, actually. So the whole thing about long-term business growth and performance is a very, very important part of the whole thing, of the entire transformational system that we had to do, to be honest, actually. And we continue to do, actually. And we have been learning along the way in terms of what works, what doesn't work. And therefore, related to this was really the operating model. Because one thing about the hotel industry is that hotel industries have always been high-cost business model, fixed model, actually. So you know that you have a once-in-a-century opportunity to rejig the operating model to make sure it is much more fit for purpose cost, actually. But equally, how do you find new sources of revenue? 120-year-old company. We just celebrated our 120th AGM a few days ago, actually. 120th-year-old company. Of course, we have seen crises in the past, actually. We had to find new revenue sources, actually. So therefore, I think one of the things that the CFO's office also had to get involved in, along with my finance team, is to be the enabler for, in the time when money was not there, to sort of say, let's spend some money in terms of trying to find new revenue drivers, actually. We were literally, in the last 18 months, we've been experimenting, actually. Where are the new growth drivers coming from, actually? So therefore, an experimentation mindset is also a very important part, especially when you're dealing in a crisis. And I think in general, even if you're not dealing in a crisis, ability to try. I think startups do this very well. Should we do plan A or should we do plan B? And then you have this A/B testing, which says, let's try both. And then we kind of go to the next one, actually. This experimentation mindset is a very important part, at least for us in the crisis, and in general is what I would say in a changing dynamic, actually. The other thing which becomes important is the whole strategic leadership, Rekha, that you spoke about, actually. I think suddenly, I think the need to demonstrate strategic leadership becomes important, because one thing which becomes very, very clear in a crisis in particular is that the CFO is as much a spokesperson as a CEO. And when I say spokesperson, I think he is hand in hand. It's almost like a dance with the CEO in terms of communicating with investors, communicating with the board, rethinking strategy, and all of that, to be honest. And I think so, therefore, I think this whole question of partner management, board management, advocacy with the government, I don't think the government of India had seen few things like this happen. I think certain nations like UK were much better prepared. So therefore, a process of educating. I think people perceive the hotel industry as a luxury industry. Then we had to tell them, you know what, it is a 10% of the GDP, one of the biggest employment drivers, because one of the biggest tax generating industries, actually. And when you start putting that, it's part of advocacy. And there, the leadership team, CFO, CEO, and the others have to play that big role, actually. So the strategic leadership requirement was suddenly much greater than in a business as usual situation. Talent management becomes very critical, because I think one of the things about organizations like Indian Hotels, which is kind of a legacy company, actually. I think you have the youngsters who are probably much more modern in terms of outlook. You also have the people who have worked for 30 years. I've got members in my team who have worked for 35 years, and I've still got 5 more years to go. And I think when you're having that kind of a thing, and we talked of empathy, and one of the group values is that we will not let anybody go In fact, the direction was clear that the pandemic is the last reason for you to let anybody go, to be honest. And manpower cost is a very significant part of the cost. So how do you deal with that in terms of not just reducing manpower cost, but also talent management? Like, for instance, reskilling has suddenly become a very important thing. Digitization has taken, because the only way we can sort of reduce manpower and is to change processes, which means digitization, both in the front end and the back end, become important. And how do you work with your existing people? Because you're not recruiting anybody anymore in the industry because of the high cost burden that is already there. So how do you work with your existing people, reskill them, think differently in terms of digital mindset? I think, and we're also asking people to shift locations actually. And fortunately, we have been growing through management contracts. We're opening hotels. So we're redeploying people, asking people to shift cities. So there's a lot of empathy, a lot of conversations with employees which are happening across the piece. And as a CFO, what happens is that it is not just the finance team which talks to you in terms of the uncertainties actually. It's also the rest of the organization also reaches out to you, either directly or through LinkedIn, phone calls, SMSs, saying that, Giri, can you also shed light in terms of what is happening actually? So communication becomes a very important piece in general. Not just communication to the board and also investors, but also communication with the employees and in terms of telling a story actually. That becomes important actually. I think these are some of the things is what we did in the hospitality industry and some of the changing mindsets which came about as a result. Actually. Over to you, Rekha, actually.
Giri, I think those are fantastic insights. I know your hospitality industry has been impacted the most, and it's great to hear how your role has evolved and sharing your own perspective there, right? I just want to check if there are any questions from the audience before we go to the next set of questions. Feel free to ask in the chat window so that we can actually bring you onto the screen so that you can have a conversation as well. I'll go to the next question. Sugata, if you're on the call, one thing, if 2020 has taught us anything, it's about, I like the comment that Giri has made. How do you, what do you do, knowing what to do when you don't know what to do? It's all about dealing with uncertainty. And how do you deal with that uncertainty? Given that we are not living in a very perfect world, and the amount of we don't know how long the pandemic is going to last, or if we will have to continue to live with this or some other form of business disruption, how do you think the CFO can navigate a company through the unknown and prepare for the future?
Ranjan, do we have?
I think there's a question from Mr. Jugender saying on key behavioral skills and also the balance between technical and relationship metrics, as you can see. So perhaps Rekha or Giri, if you'd like to address that question, or Vishali.
Sorry, Pranjal, I think the behavioral skills we probably touched upon, right? I think Vaishali touched upon a little bit, and Giri also alluded to during his conversation. The second one, in terms of, we always talk of technical skills for CFO. We already have a CTO for the same. What's the relationship metrics and collaboration you suggest between CFO and CTO? I think that's a fantastic question. Maybe I can share my perspective, and Giri, feel free to add on that one. In a lot of organizations, today in today's world, we're already seeing the CTOs reporting into the CFOs. That's one part of the thing. The second part I would also think about is technology is probably not a single person's job in today's world, right? It has to be, it's almost like, everyone needs to have that citizen mindset in terms of, when we look at the latest technological trends and all, where we are expecting a lot of automated tools, putting technology in the hands of end user. It's almost everyone thinking to and driving the digitization, whether it is digital models. It's not just IT sitting somewhere and trying to build an app, right? It's more in terms of how we are embracing technology in all through, engaging with our employees, engaging with our customers, and also streamlining our operations, right? It's and most importantly, top line, how do we grow top line revenue using technology? It's almost like a 4 pillar view. That's the way I would see. And it's become a role that's all pervasive across the organization. Giri, over to you to share your perspective.
No, that is correct. Actually, I think you articulated it correct in terms of saying it is customer view, employee view. I mean, operational transformation, driving top lines. I think I see the CEO and the CFO and the CTO kind of working together. To be honest, actually, I think whether they report one reports to the other or not is less relevant. I think working together becomes very critical. Yeah.
Uh, uh, Sakshi, can you please make Indra a panelist, please?
So the relationship between, I think, CFO and CTO is an interesting part of what we're discussing. And also, there's a very good question from Mr. Tiwari from Gale on whether this survey and the findings, do they apply also to government-run PSUs as well? Perhaps, Vishali, you could join. Sugata has also joined us. So Sugata, you work also with a lot of government companies. So perhaps your views on this would be welcome.
Yeah, sorry. I just actually missed the question. So if you can repeat the question, sorry.
We have been discussing various elements of the report and the survey, Chupata. But one question which has come up, as you can see in the Q&A box, is about the impact on government bodies as well. And there's another question that's from Mr. A.K. Tiwari, who's Director of Finance Gale. There's another question from Rajendra Shrimal. Would be good if the panel can highlight what are the areas of strategic management that CFOs have lacked. So that your guidance and your own experience could perhaps guide the answer.
Okay, so let me take that up on the strategic management piece, because what is coming out and has come out in our survey as well is that strategic leadership is an area where CFOs are expected to transform actually significantly and then invest their own time and energy the most. So I won't say where CFOs have lacked, but I would put it as where we will have to invest more time is to understand what is changing for the business. So what is changing for the business is in context of the environment, and in the environment there is a lot changing because I think there are 2 or 3 major changes. One is technology, and the other is things like sustainability and governance, where the expectation is very different. Now, if you think about these 2 things, let us say technology and sustainability, the CFO sits in the center of it. So for the digital journey of an organization, apart from the product digitization, wherever it is end-to-end process digitization, the CFO can play a very central role because it is all about data strategy. It starts with data strategy. Then it's about the digitization of processes in the value chain and supply chain, as well as the digital customer journey. So the whole thing, the CFO can be a central piece. Secondly, on sustainability, and I've been talking to audit committee chairmen who have said to me that they don't look at anything else but the CFO to hold the whole piece of sustainability together in terms of what is the journey, how do you measure it, what does it impact, etc. So these are the areas which are most strategic for organizations now, and where the CFO would get more and more invested, I would say.
Pranjal, I just want to add one more point here. I think all of y'all have covered the strategic aspect very clearly. But going forward, also one more thing which I would like to add is, and that's clearly also emerging, is that the culture of digital is not just going to be very very specifically only managed by the digital team, but it's going to touch the last level of the organization, and finance is very central there. Therefore, from apart from the strategic requirement of being digitally focused, even from a mindset change, from a DNA change and cultural nuances change, the digital aspect is going to be very critical for the CFO's role.
I think if I can just build on the strategic leadership bit, I think one of the frameworks I like to use is what is the size of price that is out there for that particular company or which in the industry that it operates. The second is to access that size of price, access the price. What are the strategic choices and strategy that the company needs to adopt? And the third is to execute against the strategy and strategic choices. What are the operating model choices that kind of come into play? I think I would sort of divide it into three buckets. And I think when you talk of strategic leadership for the CFO, most CFOs actually operate at the operating model level, which means that you are focused in terms of efficiencies and productivity and all of those actually. But strategic leadership will mean that you understand where the size of price, what is happening to the price and how it is changing, which means the CFO is forced to be more external actually. Many CFOs that I see are more internal in terms of looking inward in the organization. But I think understanding the price means that CFOs need to be much more external actually. External, not in terms of banks and treasury and taxation, which is what CFOs are very good at in terms of being external. It is also being external in terms of industry dynamics, what kind of trends are emerging, how are consumer trends kind of changing. I think it's very important so that the CFO dials into the size of price discussion very well and therefore participates effectively in the strategic choices that need to be made. I think that for me is a very important thing. And once that happens, then the operating model implications become much simpler actually in terms of, it's a much easier thing. Otherwise, what happens is that you're focused only on the operating model, and that sometimes can be just a bit narrower.
Yeah. Giri, maybe one more thing I want to add, I think beautifully you mentioned the size of the price. A lot of times, one is about market share, but also how do we even think about, increasing the pie as well?
Correct.
We have seen some companies do that beautifully well in terms of, hey, today this is the market, but then how do we increase the sizing of the market itself, looking at new frontiers which are probably currently not even in the radar, right? That's what I think CFOs will need to go and build that muscle in terms of that strategic mindset of continuously growing that top line revenue. It's not just getting it from the competition, but how do we grow the size of the pie itself together as an industry.
Absolutely.
So maybe while we wait for, I think there's one more question from Mr. A.K. Tiwari. Vaishali, if you can also take some time to answer this one. How relevant is the report to the government organizations and PSUs? In my opinion, after looking at the report, I thought it was super relevant, but it will be good for you to add your insights, Vaishali.
Yes, absolutely, Rekha. We also, while brainstorming, we discussed this part, and we also feel that having worked with a lot of public sector and government organization, the world for them and the learning from them is also almost the same. May not be at as much as like what Giri mentioned in the hospitality world, what he had to go through, because the specialization as a function in public sector is on the higher side, and therefore the silos and the working is very very structured. So given that being the background and the framework, the impact may not be so much as the private organization, but it is definitely going to be there going for. And CFOs in this crisis situation, even in the public sector and government organization, have held the battle very well, been with the CEOs and the chairman together to manage all the crises. So yes, absolutely. It is a very important aspect.
Yeah, and just one thing to add, Vaishali, to this is that the government is now behaving as much demanding shareholder like any other private shareholder, to be honest. I think the days where of commanding heights and the areas where the government wants to be there is reducing. It's now getting smaller and smaller in terms of how the role of the government in these companies actually. And therefore, I do feel that the PSUs themselves will find that getting money from the government for supporting is going to reduce. Dividend requirements, performance requirements are going to increase. And no longer are there monopolies saying that this is the PSU which will be doing in this particular area, and then we know that private enterprises. So the PSUs also have to compete in the marketplace with private enterprises. And as governments decide to privatize more, because of the need to sort of say we don't need to be in these areas, as an example. I think the role of CFOs in these enterprises to help navigate and transform the enterprises to a successful listing, successful, what do you say, transformation to a private enterprise would be a very big part of the challenge, is what I think.
Rekha, can I add one more point? It's a very interesting reflection I just did, is that while we are thinking of, and there are quite a few examples in the private world where a CFO is aspiring to be the CEO. In public sector, it's a natural thing to happen. There are so many examples of the chairmen who have had a background of a CFO, and that's a natural thing. It is always happened in the public sector. Just thought
that is true. That is true. That is true.
Rekha, Mr. Parashar is our senior member of the board. May I request him to ask a question? Mr. Parashar, please ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Giri. Hi, everybody. Suboto, Pranjal, Rekha. Giri, I just had a quick question. In light of all the doom and gloom that was happening in the industry, how do you manage to get approvals for new hotels or building new properties or opening new properties?
I think we have opened properties. One we opened in West Bengal, one in Ahmedabad. We have opened one in Trivandrum. We're opening one in Chennai. I think locally, these are managed properties. They're not properties owned by us. They're owned by different partners, actually. I have not seen challenges in terms of opening properties. In fact, we have been worried about getting some of the properties open because we don't want owners to make losses. But at a local level, I think the owners have been able to get approvals, actually. Maybe I will talk with you offline on this and maybe introduce you to our BD team also. No problem. We can talk about it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
I think thank you, Giri. There's one question on talent development, really relevant question from Rajendra Srimal. Maybe, Sugata, if you can share your experiences in terms of how your organization has been thinking about developing the L-1 and L-2 talent and preparing for the future.
Yeah, no, this is a favorite area and a hot area for us. So you see, we there's a huge movement which is happening in the finance function in our company across the group on the transformation of the finance function. So what we've done is we've tried to kind of articulate what finance function should be going forward, and we've said this is a mission statement. So it basically says that we have digital mindset and skills. We want to turn data into actionable insights. So as opposed to producing the data, we want to turn data, we want to focus on turning data into actionable insights, and we want to find smart ways of managing control and governance. So with this, there is a movement happening, and the first thing that we have understood is that you have to get your basic systems right. So your processes have to be standardized, your data models have to be uniform, ERPs have to be aligned. So there's the basic work which is getting done across countries for enabling that. On top of that, the tools which are coming on are the analytical tools, the data visualization tools, etc. Now, in terms of the team per se, we have identified certain sets of skills and hard skills and attributes, So hard skills which will be relevant going forward is again digital mindset, analytical skills, business acumen. These are some of the top skills which we have listed. And in terms of attributes, we've said adaptive to transformation, innovative thinking, influencing without authority, collaborative, etc. Because the finance teams, as we go forward, are going to be more transversal, more horizontal rather than vertical and hierarchical. So then what we have said is we are building a target operating model, which means what should each role in finance do? So there are major role types in finance, like finance business partners, accountants for transactions, accountants for financial reporting, financial planning and analysis, controlling, etc. So what should each of them do if the whole function has to be more digital savvy, giving mainly insights to business, smartly controlling, governance, etc. We have the target operating model, we have the skill sets, and then we are developing an action plan journey to transform. So three parts of it again quickly. One part is the education. So we have in the company we have an online finance academy which is done in collaboration with someone. So the finance academy has lots of material. So one of the things that we are doing as CFOs is trying to channel the right material to the right role types. Secondly, we are saying experience. So we're going to promote more and more people who want to do diverse roles in finance or elsewhere, and we're going to encourage more and more such people who are open to doing diverse roles. And the third thing is exposure. So we have an online system by which people put up projects and people can say that I want to work on this project for 2 months. So several areas, but as I say, it's a whole movement which is happening, but it's a lot of awareness that finance function is going to change. As I said, it's going to be a more less hierarchical, a combination of generalists and specialists, and more business focused and more savvy.
Yeah.
Rekha, I think Kali had to leave, but we have time for one last question from Jogendra Singh.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Giri. It was wonderful, listening to you and Sugita, always. So my question primarily is, relating to a Bain report that came in terms of, 2008 crisis, where they tracked about 3,000 plus companies, and they said companies that made bold decisions during that period grew at a rate of 18% CAGR over the next 10 years. So the question is, now that was one crisis, now this is another crisis. In these crises, what is your experience of companies taking those kind of bold decisions, which are going to give them dividends over next 10, 20 years?
Yeah, no, I think I can answer that. I think number one is that I think we are taking bold decisions. To be honest, I think it's not that bold, not necessarily completely pioneering, because some of these things are already happening and we as a legacy company may not have done it. And give you a very simple example. We started a food delivery service called Qmin. Many of you must have experienced. It came of a customers telling us, how can I get Golden Dragon food or Shamiana food actually. So we started this actually. Now from specialty food being delivered home to an app. So we built an app. It has now gone to comfort food. We're talking cloud kitchens. We are talking, how do you compare yourself with some of the leaders who are, some of the other people, startups who are there, Rebel Foods, and a whole bunch of things. And suddenly we think that out of nowhere in the pandemic, we potentially have created 100 crores plus business. I'm just saying that just an example actually. And when you talk value creation, I think one of the things is the narratives are also changing, Jogendra. One of the things about the historical hotel narrative has always been about asset heavy hotel construct karne ka, and then and the customers will come. But now it's no longer about an asset heavy thing. So you're talking about asset light approaches, ROIC is far more sharper as an example. And therefore your strategies are getting focused around lesser investment actually. And when you talk of digital businesses, so suddenly Qmin, we are talking about it as a narrative, which is an all digital business actually. And we're actually housing it in a 100% subsidiary to sort of see whether tomorrow, if it becomes a 100 crore business, can we get a valuation which is disproportionate to what a hotel valuation can be? Example. So I think that definitely industries are putting in place disruptive methodologies is what I think actually. And speaking purely for the function, Jogendra, I'm kind of slightly digressing to talk of the transformational moves. Even, one of the things I like in terms of talent actually, one of the things I like to do is what I call as organization and people review, which means that when you sit in terms of thinking about your finance function, don't think functions, accounting, tax, and all that. Don't think that. Start with what is the overall strategy for the organization, and therefore what are the implications for the finance function, and therefore what is the implication in terms of how you build teams together. That's a much nicer framework in terms of talent management. And when you start looking at it, you're already thinking, maybe my MIS team is not going to be from a CFO, chartered accountants. It maybe has got a data analyst there. And, I have, 2 years ago, I took an executive assistant to work with me, actually. He came from the hotel. He worked with me for a couple of years. Now he has gone, he's heading strategy for North India, actually. So which means, how do you enable cross-functional moves as an example, actually? I am absolutely okay with a marketing guy coming and working with me, actually. So I think the crisis, as they say, necessity is the mother of invention. I think when you learn to live with less resources, I think you need to think, you start thinking creatively. I have no doubts that the quality of growth that companies will display post the pandemic is going to be far better than what has happened before, because it's not the top line. I think the shape of the P&L is changing, Jogendra, actually. I'm a fan of shape of the P&L changes, to be honest, actually. I think the shape of the P&L will change like never before for almost every company is what I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we are now beyond the convergence of, digital tech and human capital that we're talking about. I think these are the new business models, which I truly, talk about, vaccinating the business model with anti-fragile code in a way. This is truly wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just mindful of that we are on the hour. I do want to thank everyone, first of all, for carving out the time towards the end of the quarter to attend the webinar, and most importantly, our KPMG team with Vaishali and the rest of the team, and also all of those who have contributed to this survey and research, so that it's really good to have this engaging discussion. Giri, Sugata, Jogendra, Anil, thank you all for contributing to the engaging panel discussion. With that, Pranjal, I will hand it over to you to discuss, to share the next steps on this one.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you speakers and all of you who attended for vibrant discussion. We'll be doing one more version of this webinar. As I mentioned in the chat, we'll be sending the report to all of you. It will also be available on the website, and look forward to discussing more such dimensions of the talent for CFOs in the future. Thank you very much for joining us today.
I think, Pranjal, if I can add just one comment before people dial off. I think some of us are passionate about building teams, actually. So we do have time on our hands on weekends. So if anybody wants to talk to us in terms of, how they are thinking about their own finance organization, more than happy if people can reach out, and I'm more than happy to spend an hour or weekends. We'll be more than happy to spend over weekends an hour or so to just kind of understand and help and share ideas. No problem.
So what I do is I'm also sharing my email so that, you can share your request to me. I can forward it to all the board members and others, because the idea is also for peer group exchange. And that would help in ensuring that we have a great conversation going with everybody all the time.
Correct.
Thank you again. Thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon, and hope to see you soon in our next edition of our webinar on the same report in a few weeks, and most likely mid of July. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.